everyone. Welcome to Keeping the Faith Through Grief and Loss. My name is Kathleen Cullen Ritter, and I work now as a grief coach and guide. Prior to this, I was the director of campus ministry at DSHA High School. So again, lots of layers of connection over time. But my work now specifically focuses on individuals and families who are experiencing death specifically, but other types of loss as well. So I have the honor of being the moderator today. And we are going to just talk through some personal testimonies through the books that these lovely women have written, but then also have some tangible conversations about ways to cope with grief, and specific to this conversation, how to keep your faith through grief and loss. So to start, there's a reflection quote that you'll see on the screen. Yesterday was a hard day, and I missed you. Today was a good day, and I missed you. I don't know what tomorrow will bring, but I will miss you. I think that so many times people, when someone dies, they say things they don't mean because they're trying to show up for you and just say, oh, I'm so sorry, it's going to be okay, when really your whole life has changed because of the love you shared with your person. And I think the idea of missing someone through all of the moments of life is a really important way to honor and acknowledge grief. It's always both. It's the joy and the pain of missing someone. And I think that our society can be really grief avoidant. Like, okay, now it's the funeral, and I don't want to bring it up because they might get sad. And so then life kind of continues when really you feel so alone, and you want people that you can share their memories with, or quirky habits or things that you miss about them. So finding tangible ways to do that in a faith community is something that is really important. So just kind of to start, how do you keep your faith through that? It's more so just acknowledging the human emotions that accompany grief. The first person I'd like to introduce is Meg Kissinger. She is a Pulitzer Prize journalist, and she wrote many investigative reportive stories here in our local community on the mental health system. And then she decided to write her own memoir, which many of you have read while you were out. So you'll get to hear from her this morning. And then you also get to hear from Gael Garbarino Cullen, who is a former local news anchor and video producer and author of Owning Grief, her memoir, but also my mom. So to continue, so she is going to start our conversation. We'll have time at the end for questions and things like that, but they're both going to share their stories, and then we're going to connect it back to practical ways that can support you in your own grief journey.
Thank you, Kathleen. I just have to embarrass her for a moment. That far, far right little girl, that's her. I wanted to give you a little bit of the background on the story that I'm talking about and that I wrote about with Owning Grief. This was taken shortly before my husband, who was 40 years old, went away on a business trip. And he'd gone on other business trips. It was not an unusual thing. And he had a habit of calling home every night when he was gone, just so he'd check in with us, hear the kids' voices, whatever. And so he actually ran the Milwaukee Marathon this particular Sunday. He'd run marathons before, though, so it wasn't the marathon that killed him. And we'd driven him to the airport and kissed him goodbye. And when he got to Cincinnati, he called that night to tell us he was there. And he called every night that he was at this conference until Wednesday night. And he was supposed to come home Thursday. And he didn't call. And I was a little surprised that he didn't, because he usually did, but I also figured, well, it's a conference. You know how they always have a dinner at the last night and all that. And I figured, well, he was busy, it probably got too late, and he didn't want to call too late. No big deal, nothing alarming. So the next day, again, he traveled a fair amount for work, and so we had an arrangement that I was to pick up the 3 older girls from school. He was going to pick up the little one from the daycare, or from the babysitter, and then once he got home from Cincinnati, and then we'd meet at home for dinner. That was the plan. And I didn't even know his exact flight number. Again, he traveled a lot. We kind of just knew that this was the way it was. I knew he was coming in the afternoon, and there'd be plenty of time to pick up Colleen, the youngest. So I get the 3 older girls home after school, and the phone rings, and it's my babysitter saying, I thought Steve was supposed to pick up Colleen. It was like, well, he was, but maybe his flight got delayed. Now remember, this is quite a while ago. This is 1995, so the cell phones that we all have, stuck to our hips or in our pockets, they didn't exist back then. So he hadn't called. I didn't know if he had been delayed or not, but it was like, oh, kind of annoying, but whatever. I went and got Colleen, no big deal. Bring her home, make dinner, and as I'm, going through the after-school rituals with the kids, homework and whatnot, and trying to get dinner on the table, and he's still not home and still not home, it's becoming a little bit disconcerting, but not crazy disconcerting yet. But again, pretty much as each minute ticked by, and he wasn't home, and he wasn't home. And I think Kathleen mentioned I'm a former reporter, so I had that in me that I wanted to start making some phone calls to find out what's going on here, but I didn't want to do it in front of the kids. So it's like, okay, so we get through dinner. I thought Daddy was coming home. Yeah, he must be just delayed, no big deal. So I get them all through dinner, and I get them all washed up and ready and into bed, I thought, for the night, and then waited probably 10 minutes more before I started making phone calls. And at this point, I'm now antsy. It's like 7 o'clock at night, and he was supposed to be home at 2 or 3 in the afternoon. So I start making phone calls. The first call is to the hotel where he was staying. And I call and get a woman, receptionist or something, who answered the phone. I said, my husband was staying at your hotel. He's not home. I'm just wondering if you know what happened, if you know where he is. And the response was, oh, I can't tell you anything. Like, okay. So I hang up the phone, and I thought, well, there was a gentleman that worked with Steve that had traveled with him on this business trip. So I called him. He was home. I said, did you not fly together? Well, he said, well, I just thought Steve took an earlier flight home. He wasn't on the plane. Like, okay. Again, the level of alarm is getting bigger and bigger. And then I called the airline. And the airline said, no, there was no Steve Cullen on the 3 o'clock flight or any one before or since then. He wasn't on a plane. Okay, I called back to the hotel and said, okay, let me talk to the manager. I talked to the manager, and at first he's very sort of, not dismissive, but just not really wanting to talk to me. And I said, he was at your hotel. That's the last place that I know that he was. Do you know something? What went on? Where is my husband? And he says, ma'am, you'll have to call the Cincinnati police. Yeah. Needless to say, the alarm bells are ringing big time. And at that point, I screamed into the phone, tell me where my husband is. It's like, you know what's going on here. I'm not going to make another phone call. And so at that point, he finally relented and said, well, the housekeeping service went to make up his room this morning, and the door was locked, so they let themselves in, and he was in bed. There was no sign of a struggle or anything. He was just gone. It's like, well, thank you for telling me that, and I had to use my reporter instincts to get this news out of them. At the time that this happened, Steve was only 40 years old. I was 41. The kids, as you can see, very, very little. All of a sudden, we're thrust into this world of grief and loss and this horrible situation. I'm a widow at 41. And my kids don't have their daddy anymore. It was awful, as I'm sure probably every single one of you in this room can attest through your own losses. It was just hideous. So I'm a big reader, and I figured I got to find something to give me a way to navigate this. I'm a newly single parent, and I just need some help with this. So I started looking for books, going to the library. I really wasn't finding much. There are lots of books about grief, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross and others, but they weren't specific to my situation, being very young with all these kids and now having to navigate my life and theirs all by myself without my life's partner. I really wasn't finding anything that I wanted a roadmap that could say, this is how to do it, and I wasn't finding it. So I determined at that point, not immediately, obviously, probably a few months after Steve died, I had determined that at some point I would write a book just to explain what my situation was, and if that ever helped somebody else deal with their own loss, great. There was no other intention behind it, just that I would write my own story. Well, needless to say, raising 4 little girls, going through grade school and high school and college and marriages and all of that, it took a while before I finally got the time and the energy to write that book. So in 2022 is when I published. So a couple years before that, I started writing this story and published it in 2022. And it was really challenging. I mean, I forced myself to take a workshop at the University of Iowa. If any of you ever want to write, I would highly recommend it. They have a summer workshop series that's amazing. And that really, I figured if I signed up for that and committed to that, that would force me to write this book that I've been saying I was going to write forever. So I took the workshop, and that did launch me on this path of writing the book. But one of the things that I struggled with the most is, and I imagine most of you can relate to this too, is that grief is not linear. You know, you write a memoir, and it usually starts out with, well, I was born here, and I went to grade school here, and then I did this, and then I went to college, and then I that's very linear. And this path, this journey of grief and loss is anything but linear, as I'm sure Meg will attest as well. You know, you go through these different states where maybe today you're really feeling lonely, and then maybe tomorrow's a better day, but now the anxiety about, will I have the resources to raise these 4 kids? Will I be able to, you know, go back to work full time? Will I lose the house because half of our income has just blown up? So there was, and yet, you know, then there'd be, you know, a couple weeks later, the loneliness would creep back in again, or the anxiety, or the many multitude of emotions that surround a loss. And so I was really struggling with how to write this memoir. And a very wise professor at Iowa said, well, why don't you write about the emotions that you go through, that you deal with in the course of grieving for somebody that is so important to you? It's like, a little light bulb went off. And so that was the approach that I decided to take. And I just wanted to share one example of one of the emotions that I dealt with. Occasionally still do. Because again, it's like a roller coaster. It doesn't quit. It just keeps coming back. Excuse me. So anyway, this is one of them, and I'm sure you will quickly understand what emotion I'm talking about. It was a cold, typical Wisconsin winter night in December, 2 months since Steve had died. I'd worked all day, picked up the kids from school and the sitter, thrown some kind of dinner together, probably broccoli stuffed chicken breasts from market day, a godsend of prepared foods that obviously some of you can relate to here through my church, that were moderately healthy and quick to cook. And it was snowing. Again, forever the snow. Exhausted by the day, the dinner hour, and the rituals of getting 4 kids tucked into bed, appropriate stories read, and nighttime prayers said, I wanted nothing more than to sit down and put my feet up, perhaps even indulge in a tiny cat nap before having to start the preparations for the next day, another school day. That meant signing any homework or notes that each kid may have had from their teachers, making lunches, familiarizing myself with any schedule amendments, such as Girl Scouts or after-school snacks that were required. And then the snow. There was nothing unusual about this particular winter storm. When you live in Milwaukee, that comes with the territory. Several storms over the course of the seemingly endless winter that stretched from the November until often well into April before releasing its icy cold white grip from your bones. You get used to it. But that particular night, as I trudged outdoors at nearly 10 p.m. to clear the sidewalk and the ever so long driveway by hand for the umpteenth time, I was angry. You should be here doing this, I shouted into the winter sky, not caring if any neighbor was witnessing the slightly crazed woman in her snow-filled driveway. This is your job, not mine. Tears streamed down my cheeks with each shovelful of the heavy cold annoyance. Steve had always taken care of the outdoor chores that came with owning a house. I handled so much of what needed to happen inside that it seemed a good working compromise. How dare he leave and dump this heavy, wet, sloppy burden on me? Of course, it wasn't really about the snow. It was yet another slap in the face, as if I needed it, reminding me that the house, the kids, the financial worries, everything sat squarely in my lap. Steve was not there to shoulder any of the mountain of responsibilities. The one who for 17 years had been by my side was noticeably, prominently, permanently absent. He hadn't asked for this, but neither had I. It seemed ridiculous to blame Steve for putting me in this mess, but I was mad, and I didn't know how to tame the anger boiling over inside of me. Can you guess what that chapter is called? Yeah, that's anger. And there are many others that relate to the emotions that we go through when we are dealing with loss and with grief. And it helped me to use those emotions as a way to pull the story together, and hopefully to provide a level of comfort and hope and joy, believe it or not, at the very end of the book. And it's not the end, life goes on. But it was quite a journey in writing it, and I know that Meg will tell you her story in just a moment, but it was one of those things that it has been just really helpful for me to think about this journey that I'm on and to kind of figure out what it's about. When I came up with the idea of, well, there's a lot of gifts that I've received in losing Steve, I thought, oh boy, people are gonna think you're off your rocker. I mean, how could losing your husband, the father of your kids, how could that possibly in any way be good? But we'll talk about this more later, but there are any number of examples where losing Steve helped make me a better person, helped make my kids stronger in many ways. There's countless ways that we have grown with our grief. And I think that that's the positive message that I think both Meg and I would like to share. So let Meg take over now and tell you about her amazing story. Meg?
Hi, everybody. Oh, yeah. Okay, so thank you so much. I want to tell you about Gail sending me a copy of her book. So I was away. I taught for a while in New York City. And Gail and I have known one another for many years. Our kids were together. Her oldest, Annie, and my son, Charlie, were in the Ulster Project together back in 2001. Anyway, and I had so much fun with Gail, and she's, as you can see, a beautiful soul and just a lovely person. So we bonded a lot that summer. And she sent me a copy of her book. And I thought, damn it, woman, do not send me your book. I'm writing my own book and I don't have time for this. So I thought okay, I'll read a chapter. Anyway, so that was at about, 8 o'clock at night. Well, fast forward to 3:30 in the morning. And I'm finishing her book because I cannot put it down. So it's so beautiful and it's so helpful. And as you can see, she has just a beautiful story to tell, a heartbreaking story, but also a very encouraging story. And in not a small way, that gave me a boost too as I was finishing my book. So my story has a lot of the similar themes, but is different, of course. So this is my family. So my mother, for some silly reason, always scheduled the photographer to come and take our family photo on Thanksgiving morning. And now, in this one, I don't have bangs. I'm the one that needs braces, standing on top of, I think, 2 phone books in order to clear my sister Patty's head. But in other iterations of this family photo, I've got the Mamie Eisenhower bangs because my mother had to chase me around the dining room table to cut my bangs. I think I finally convinced her to not do that in this picture. But anyway, this is clan, and we grew up in the North Shore suburbs of Chicago, a town called Wilmette. And I'm the 4th of these 8 kids, and they were born as many families were put together in those days in lickety-split fashion. We had a lot of fun. Our family had a great deal of fun, and we were lucky enough in those early days to have some resources to be able to take great family vacations. We loved to go skiing up in, we would go to the Porcupine Mountains and the Upper Peninsula and come up to Wisconsin any chance we could get. We were those Illinois people coming up to Wisconsin. Anyway, but as the years went by, it was also apparent amid all that fun, there was beginning to be some emerging mental illness. And we didn't know in those days how to talk about that. And so as it became clear that my sister Nancy, who's next to me, she's the glamour puss. Well, my two older sisters were stone cold foxes, let's face it. Anyway, so my sister Nancy was the first to really present with what we would now know to be bipolar. And so that was marked by, wide mood swings. She was misbehaved. And what we thought was just kind of naughty behavior was really, burgeoning mental illness. And then sadly, as things would happen, Nancy ended up taking her own life. She died in 1978, and I was going into my senior year of college. And I'll just tell you that she died on a Friday night. And this was after many, many, many suicide attempts. And I've told this story so many times, but I think it's worth repeating. On the night that she died, my dad gathered us all into the living room and told us emphatically, if anybody asks, this was an accident. And he didn't say that to be mean. He was scared. And one of his fears was that the Catholic Church would not allow my sister to have a funeral or to be buried in our family's cemetery plot at Holy Cross here in Milwaukee. As it turned out, that wasn't the case, happily. She, in fact, had a con-celebrated funeral mass. I think there were 3 or 4 priests up on the altar. It was a great comfort to my mom and dad. But what that did, that admonition, was to fill us with fear and shame. And as I've said a million times, and I'll probably say a million more, shame is toxic, and nothing good comes from shame. So, but still that was rattling around in our hearts and in our heads. And as I said, she died on a Friday night. The wake was on Sunday, which was also Father's Day. And her funeral was on Monday morning. So by Tuesday, we were all back doing whatever it is that we were doing. I was working downtown that summer, downtown Chicago, and the little kids were taking basketball camp or whatever. We were all just scattered, never to gather as a family to talk about this. We'd have little side conversations here and there, but it was nothing that we attended with any kind of rigor, or we certainly never called in a family therapist. I think about this so much because what that did was to make us be ashamed and afraid. I don't mean to blame my dad. My dad was a loving, wonderful guy. But this was just kind of the era and what happens when we don't talk about things. So the little guy sitting on my dad's lap, that was my brother Danny. And Danny also struggled with his mental health, and later would also be diagnosed with bipolar. And very tragically, he also died by suicide. He also took his own life. I remember the week before he died, he sent me a letter acknowledging finally what it was like for him to live with mental illness. He would never acknowledge that. In fact, when you would suggest that to him, he'd become very angry, and because he was so ashamed. But what Danny said to me in that letter the week before he died was that he acknowledged that that's what he had. And he said he was apologizing. He said, I've done and said some awful things and awkward things. And really the only way for us to help people with mental illness is to love and understand them. And I thought that that was kind of a cheesy thing to say when I read it. But then when he died the next week, those words became very precious to me. And reflecting on it, I found it to be really the perfect algorithm. That when you love someone, you're going to work to understand them. And the reverse is true too. When you understand them, you're probably going to love them. So I wrote those words down on a little index card, and I taped it to the side of my computer at the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel. And I was lucky enough to work there and have great editors. And the editors encouraged me to write about, our awful mental health system. And I'm going to read you a little section of what motivated me to really then, that was a turning point in my life after Danny died. And I was resolved then, to not ever tell anybody that this was an accident, but to do the opposite, to talk about the reality of how lethal mental illness can be and how we need to do all that we can to give better care for people struggling with mental illness. And as I said, I was so fortunate because the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel had awesome editors who were devoted to telling these hard stories. As it turns out, my immediate editor was a guy named Don Walker, and Don's wife, Sue, is here today. And Don had asked me if I would write a story about what it's like for a family to lose two people to suicide. So this is what I wrote. Are you out of your damn mind? I told Don. How could I possibly write about something so painful? Why would anyone want to take advice from people stupid enough to let this happen twice? We were losers as far as I was concerned. To lose one sibling is a tragedy, I said, paraphrasing the old Oscar Wilde quote. To lose two looks like carelessness. Besides, Danny was hardly a sympathetic character. I'm sure plenty of people remembered his role in the hate mail case and thought that Danny had gotten exactly what he deserved. Then, a few months later, two seemingly unrelated events happened that changed my mind. On New Year's Eve, Bobby and Ethel Kennedy's son, Michael, was playing football on skis in Aspen, Colorado, when he slammed into a tree and broke his neck, killing himself almost instantly. In a family famous for fast lives and tragic endings, Michael was one of the most notorious Kennedys. He'd made headlines years earlier for having sex with his children's 14-year-old babysitter. Still, the outpouring of grief from his brothers and sisters was striking. Like Danny, he'd humiliated his clan. Yet his siblings found the grace to eulogize him so tenderly that it was impossible not to share their sorrow. His brother Joe called Michael 100 Points of Light and invoked an E.A. Houseman poem, saying his fun-loving spirit was like the wind through the woods. Through him the gale of life blew high. We love Danny no less, but this is what suicide does. It deprives family of their primal need to grieve. The shame of how they died overshadows them. We don't talk about the people we love who end their own lives in the same way that we do if they died of leukemia or heart failure or had been killed in a skiing accident. It's an especially lonely kind of grief. Danny made a mess of his life, but he didn't ask to be sick. And as we soon learn, he was fervently trying to turn things around. While my dad was in Oregon visiting my youngest sister, Molly, my brother Billy and I decided to clean out Danny's belongings. We came across a planner with a list of our names and birthdays. Danny was collecting words of inspiration. He cited, ways to live a better life. Quote, "Do not have thoughts for tomorrow, only today," Danny wrote to himself. "Shine and do good works. Forgive yourself. Collect treasures for heaven." Was Danny in heaven? Was there heaven? I sure as hell hope so. Billy's shoulders began to shake as we read these notes, and we both took deep breaths, hoping that the air would steady us. We imagined Danny poring over his self-help books, desperate for instructions, then sitting down and scribbling these bromides in a frantic effort to get well. Now we could see what we hadn't been able to before. Danny was scared and fighting as hard as he could. We'd both read plenty of those stories about people with cancer who battled to the end, and what a noble warrior they were. How was Danny's campaign any less heroic? Maybe Don, my editor, was right. Maybe our family's story could help others. Okay, I told Don, what the hell? I'll write that story. So that's what I did. I wrote the story. You want to know the truth? It wasn't really very well written. And it appeared, I think, probably too soon after Danny died. But it really served as a springboard for how I would spend the next 25 years. And that was going all over the country, asking two questions. Why do we treat people with mental illness so poorly in comparison to how we treat people struggling with other forms of illness? And what can we do to make their lives better? So that's what I did. And I learned quite a lot. And it's all in this book. Well, not all of it, but a lot of it. Anyway, but writing that has been a great release. And just as Gail related how it helped frame her, this was a great catharsis for me. And that's my hope, is that that will break down it'll start some conversations, and it surely has. This book has been out for a little over a year, and this has been the most richly rewarding, in some ways demanding years, but also just to be able to have these conversations with people about topics that we never discussed before has been such a grace for me. So I'm going to shut up and turn it back over to Kathleen. Thank you.
Thank you, Meg and Gail, for sharing. And thank you all again, all for being here. I think some of the complexities that both of them bring up in their stories shows our real human experience. And as people of faith, questions that we grapple with and pray about, and the reason that we really need each other and our faith to get through challenging times. In addition to some of the things they talked about with it not being linear and all the different emotions that accompany all of the aspects of challenges in our life, another big important part of grief is the paradox of it. In this picture, you see a forest fire, and a lot of times, like when really challenging things are happening in our lives, it feels like everything around us is being destroyed, and there's nowhere for growth and rebirth. But the ultimate paradox is that after the burning soil, it actually becomes richer and new things can grow. And I think it's really important to recognize that people are like that too. So both of these women have shared parts of their story, and we're going to connect it to ways that can support each of you. But I think it's also important to connect it to the unconditional love of God. And when we feel like we're in our hardest moments of life and we don't understand the purpose and we don't understand why things are happening, being able to connect it to people around us and find ways to navigate that is one of the most important things that we can do. So some tangible things about post-traumatic growth or living after loss would be different things that can come from it. So I know my mom had mentioned like gifts of grief, and which sounds wild, but a lot of times it's never to take away the pain that you've experienced, but it can be like someone might be showing up for you or coming into your life that you didn't expect. Otherwise, there could be new possibilities, or just in general, a greater appreciation for the time in your life that you have now, and getting involved in your community in different ways, opening yourself up to new possibilities. So after the pain of death and loss or diagnosis, just finding ways in that time, not to say like, oh, everything's great, but in that finding moments of growth can be something that is an important part of the grief journey. I think because our God is a loving God, it takes time to find ways that this growth is present. I think that we can have all of the emotions at God too, like I'm so angry, this doesn't make sense, who would do this? But then finding ways over time through prayer and reflection to be good to yourself and to try and live into the questions, even if we don't have answers to them. So much of our faith is that, showing up in that way. So both Gail and Meg will answer some questions just in terms of how they've seen post-traumatic growth in their own lives, and then we'll talk through some other grief concepts before opening up.
Well, I just want to say, okay, so I'm a huge believer in the Holy Spirit, and I think it's amazing that the gospel today was about the two greatest commandments.
There's love God first and then love your neighbor, but also the reflection about how much God does love us. And I think that's a really hard thing to remember or to keep in mind when you are in your grief. How could God do this to you? I had so many people say to me, how is it possible that you're still Catholic? I need to be Catholic. It's in my bones, and it's and I thank God every day, for my faith, which is a chore. You have to. Not a chore. It's something you need to work. It's a gift, first of all, and then something that you need to work to strengthen. But I think it was as I was reading. I first thing every morning, I always read Richard Rohr. I love him. Roar for roar. Anyway, and then I also do my little exercise routine to the pray as you go. But anyway, today is all about God's love for us. And I just think that it is something that you lose sight of sometimes in grief. And it is something that I work on reminding myself of all the time. And when you do that, those of you going through grief, for me anyway, I'll just say that when I do that, when I remember that God loves me unconditionally, good thing too, because I've got a lot of conditions. But anyway, how can you not then turn around and try and share that love?
We could probably talk at length about any one of these, but one of the ones I wanted to hit on was relationships. What I discovered in losing Steve was that there were so many people in my life, people that I really thought would be there and be my stalwarts and that would be helping me through this, and there were a lot of those. But there were some others that I thought would be there for me, and they weren't. And still others that I had no idea. There's a couple in this room today, but I won't mention them by name. A couple that came forward that I never anticipated that they would be the ones to be, can I take the girls to soccer today? Can I help with this? What can I do to help you out to make your life a little bit easier? And so the beauty of the post-traumatic growth is that you find additional relationships and maybe stronger relationships and maybe a few relationships that weren't worth maintaining anyway, but you could focus on others that are so more important. The new possibilities, in my case, it allowed me to become stronger. I had to raise these 4 kids by myself and figure out how to help them figure out their lives. And so I grew a lot stronger, and in turn that allowed me to be stronger in terms of even figuring out who I was now after losing my husband, and pursuing my career, and getting the opportunity to teach 4 summers in Italy, for heaven's sakes. I mean, some wonderful opportunities that came my way because I was open to them, and I think I grew stronger, and certainly they helped me appreciate life a whole lot more.
Just to close up on the post-traumatic growth, I think for me, my practice is called grief, grit, gratitude. And I think sometimes, again, the gratitude piece can be thrown off when you're talking about grief and hard things that have happened. But it's always the awareness that you're not grateful for what happened, but it's finding ways, whether it's through people or through those new opportunities or a new appreciation for life, that you're able to then say, like, oh, this is my growth in this. Maybe you're more involved in your parish community and bereavement ministry or other outreach because of your loved one and the type of work that they stood for. So it's finding ways to integrate the person that they were into your life now. Not to say that you're not feeling sad or missing them, but it's like the connection of that is really one of the big components of post-traumatic growth.
Yes. I just wanted to add to that, one of the things I learned the hard way was humility and the need to acknowledge how broken you can feel when you're in your grief, and to not reject that out of hand, to embrace it, and to then bear witness. You know, a huge reason why I wrote this book and why my brothers and sisters signed on to it was to bear witness, which was not an easy story to tell, as Gail's was not as well, but that to make yourself open, and I mean, I guess you'd say like literally an open book in our case, and to acknowledge just the humanity and the brokenness that we all feel. And in my case, you know, mental illness is such a taboo topic, or long has been. I'm doing everything I can to change that, but and I think our society is coming a long way, especially since COVID. You know, people are acknowledging isolation, loneliness. But my point in all of this is that when we bear witness, when we acknowledge our brokenness, when we acknowledge our humanity, when we look for help from others, and then we can also offer that same help. But there's no shame in needing to get professional help, to get therapy. I believe that it was considered a long time ago to be a source of weakness when you reach out and you need professional help. I see it so differently now, and I see that really as a source of strength. And I'll just quickly tell you that my oldest brother, Jake, who lives in a group home in Skokie, Illinois, for people with serious mental illness, and Jake's diagnosis is depression and anxiety. But I learned so much from that guy about not being ashamed of who he is. He is how God made him. And he needs help from time to time, and he's not ashamed to say that. So I just think that comes with this post-traumatic growth, is the ability to acknowledge how we can sometimes be broken and need help and need to reach out to one another.
Thank you. Now we're going to talk about some ways that you can care for yourself while you're grieving, and both Meg and Gail will give some examples of how they've used some of these more than others in their own life, just to talk about some of the tangible ways. So the first one is prayer. Do either of you want to give an example of how prayer has helped in your journey?
Go ahead. No, I already did mine. I already told you my thing.
As Meg attested, you know, I'm sure all of you or many of you have heard somebody say, when you go through a traumatic loss or a traumatic situation in your own lives, that you'll have people say, well, I don't know how you can possibly still believe in God. And I think I'm very fortunate that I do have that gift. And it was difficult. Trust me, if you read either of our books, you'll see examples of times when it has been difficult. But I look at, I'm not looking at necessarily the man-made church. I'm looking at a faith in God and a greater authority. And that doesn't matter if you're Jewish or Muslim or Catholic or Presbyterian or any of those things. To have a belief in a higher authority is absolutely something that has helped me in my journey and continues to help me when I face new challenges and when I put one foot in front of the other, because there's always new challenges. I'm sure everybody in this room can attest to that. I went through cancer. I had a horrible bicycle accident. I mean, the list is almost endless. I wish it was endless, or not endless, but it is. So I think the beauty of prayer and of reflection and of allowing yourself the time to recognize those in your life and to believe in whatever way it is comfortable for you to believe that there is a higher authority that's helping you deal with everything that life ultimately throws your way. If I could real quickly, I'm jumping ahead a little bit here, but real quickly, a sort of cute story about exercise. Steve and I were married only a couple of years, and he came from work one day with a box of running shoes. And I said to him, "What's this?" "Well, they're running shoes." I said, "I know what they are. What are you giving them to me for?" Steve was a big runner. I mean, he ran, I don't know how many marathons he ran in his life. He was a big runner. It was a big deal for him. And I had never run anywhere. But he thought it would be a good bonding thing for us to do together, and we could spend time on weekends doing runs together. And it's like, okay, well, I love this guy. I guess I'll give it a try. And I laced up those shoes the first time and ran around the block and thought my lungs were going to explode. Needless to say, I hung with it though, and it became a huge thing for me. So when you talk about exercise, that's something that in my case, and I don't say that is for everybody, but in some way, finding a way to take care of your body and to do good things for your body is a really wonderful thing. The exercise was one good way, especially with 4 little ones, that I could actually get away for 40 minutes and not have anybody tugging at me or wanting me for something or other. But since then, it also is a great time for me I don't run as much anymore. I run and walk more, but still it's a time for me to have that moment or 40 minutes or hour or whatever it is of just solitude, that I can think about nothing if I want, or I can solve all of life's problems or think that I do in that amount of time. It's just a way to come within yourself and to call upon that prayer to help you moving forward in that day, in that moment, in that experience that you're experiencing at that time.
Okay, I got one word for you. Well, 2 words. E-bike. I just got a new e-bike. It is my best friend. Okay, and her name is Mary Frances. I originally named her Mary, and my daughter was like, that's my name, right? So I'm like, okay, I'll add a Francis because I love Pope Francis. Okay, so Mary Frances and I are besties, and I just zoom all around town. The second word is lake. So Lake Michigan. So my pals are here in we jump into Lake Michigan year-round. We are the crazy cold plungers, and I can just tell you, it completely refreshes me in every way. Body, mind, spirit, strength. It is awesome. Y'all get down to the lake. It's right there, and it is so joyful. I truly and honestly could not have written this book if it had not been for those ladies in that lake.
So those are a few examples of some self-care. I think also just back to the prayer piece of it, there's so many examples in our scripture of ways where you see Jesus struggling at the death of his friend Lazarus, and the things that he goes through, being able to realize he also struggled, and taking that to prayer. I know when we were brainstorming for this, we talked about some with the rosary, how that can be really calming in terms of the repetition of it, or going to adoration, having that time in solace with God and being able to take those opportunities to prayer, or some other ways in terms of living your faith through it. As a kid during that time, I know we would always go to Mass on Sunday, and half the time it was like, what are we doing and what's going on? It was very chaotic to get out of the house with all four of us. But I think that ritual of like, sometimes you do things and you don't know why you're doing them, and then it ends up being that habit of praying in community, being together, learning about other people's stories, like being able to be at something like today where you're able to say like, yes, I'm hurting and I've lost this loved one, or I'm supporting someone who's lost someone important to them, but I can also have the capacity to hear someone else's story, is something that's really important. And I think that it's another way of self-care, being able to kind of be in both ways. So maybe you'll be cold plunging, or maybe you'll be sitting by a fire, having a cup of tea, or looking through picture books, if that's helpful, listening to music that is comforting. With grief, just in the ways it's not linear, there's some things that work for some people and some things that don't. So you might find going to a cemetery very comforting. Some people never want to be there, and there's not a right or wrong way to do it. It's just finding ways that help you to remember and honor your loved one, and being able to integrate that into your daily lived experience. So some other ways to help yourself, and that we talked about, were accepting support from other people. And these, with each of these ones, Meg and Gael are going to talk about ways that they've done that in their own lives. So accepting support. Who wants to?
Yeah. Okay, so another pro tip, don't wait until you're 62 years old to see a therapist. Okay, so that's how long it took me. And, I had one false start. It's in the book. But when I told the lady, she's like, tell me about your family. I'm like, oh my God in heaven. Okay, woo. And I thought she was gonna hit the little button under the desk, and the guy with the net was gonna come and take me away. But anyway, so then I never went back for 10 more years. But when I started to write this book, I thought I'm gonna actually get the help of a professional. And that was most helpful. So yeah, again, I'm repeating myself, but just, if that's what you need, no shame in it. There's a reason why there are professional therapists that can help you put proportion.
On that topic also, I was now newly single mother. I was a career woman, and I had these 4 kids, and by golly, I was determined that I was gonna do all this myself. And guess what? Couldn't do it. I had 4 kids playing soccer at the same time. They're all different ages, so they're all on different teams. They've all got different schedules. I mean, just that alone, there's no physical way I could have possibly made that happen. And that's a light example of it, but there were many in the course of me accepting help and realizing there's no shame in that. It's a perfectly legitimate thing to do, and it's a way that others can grieve also, and help you in your grief by allowing them the possibility of picking up dinner and bringing it over to your house, or whatever it might be. And that was a hard thing for me to learn, but I'm sure glad that I did, because that made a world of difference for me. Embracing the emotions, that's something that I think, Kathleen touched on this briefly, I think our society is very grief avoidant. I can't tell you how many people would either avoid me, either physically avoid me, or that would kind of, oh yeah, okay, I change the subject and move on, and not even want to make eye contact with me, because it was maybe too hard for them in their own grief, but also, oh, I don't want to upset Gail. I don't want to make her cry. It's like, that's my business. If I want to cry, there's nothing wrong with that, and we shouldn't be ashamed of that. That's my emotions, and let me be the one to say, you know what, that story's too much right now, I can't handle it. Or please tell me a funny story that you remember about my husband. That would make me so happy to hear. And I think embracing that and letting other people know. I had on my own sort of come up with this idea that because my kids were so little when they lost their dad, I wanted them to find a way to know their dad. And the oldest was only 9, Kathleen was only 8. The others were 5 and 3. I mean, they largely don't remember their dad. Kathleen maybe a little, and my eldest tiny bit, but they don't remember their dad. And I wanted people to know that it was okay to talk about him. So I wouldn't like go out searching for a way to bring Steve into a conversation, but if I saw somebody wearing a Green Bay Packers shirt, and I would say, oh, Steve would have hated that because he liked the 49ers, or whatever, that bringing up his name and allowing people, oh, she's talking about Steve. So then it's okay, I guess, if I have a little story I want to relate about Steve. And that's a gift. That was one of those many gifts that just allowing people that opportunity to know, don't be afraid to talk to me. Don't be afraid if I cry a little bit. There's nothing wrong with that. And please, tell me stories. I love hearing them.
So on the anniversary of Danny's death every year, I used to like pull out his picture and play Danny Boy like 18 times and just sob my head off. I stopped doing that a couple years ago, but it was important for me to like let that out and to remember him. And then in putting this book together, you know, I'd really forgotten my sister Nancy. She had died so many years ago. And again, because they both died by suicide, and that was, you know, a source of shame. So that really eroded my memories. And when I was assembling this book, it was really important for me to try and bring them to reanimate them. And so I tracked down, you know, a lot of my sister's old high school boyfriends. Like one of them we called the hugger, and the other was the kisser. And the kisser told me way too much information about how he got that nickname. But anyway, but it felt so good, you know. It's just like I started remembering my sister again in such tender, vivid ways that time had eroded. So it is very important. And Gail, what you said is so true. You know, like the person might be painful for that person, but what I've learned is it's very important. And so be gracious enough to make time to talk to people about the grief that they're going through.
I'm going to ask you both to speak to the bottom one, which is looking to Christ for proportion. Can either of you give examples of that?
So I love, this is weird, like trigger warning, it's weird, but for me, when I look at the cross, when I look at Christ on the cross, it brings me so much peace. Like, I'm sorry that he had to go through that, but I just find like Jesus suffered, and that puts my suffering into context. And I find his example, you know, of just giving up his life for us to know God. And so, yeah, I think just that I might be having a hard day, but whew, that guy died on the cross.
She said it so eloquently, I'm not sure what more I can add, but all of us have our own little prayer rituals, I'm sure, but mine is on my elliptical every morning as I'm working out. The first at least 10, maybe 15 minutes of my time on there is devoted to thinking about other people and other people's needs, and trying to connect with God about, you know, this person could really use your help today. If there's a way you could, and that's part of my routine. I'm on the stupid elliptical anyway. There's nowhere I'm going. So it's just a way for me to look to him and to accept that he did make the ultimate sacrifice for us, and so maybe there are ways that he will. I don't get specific. I've learned that. Don't ask for a specific, please give me $1 million. But to ask in a more general sense about, please help this person who's going through a really difficult time right now. Please give them the grace to move forward in a positive way. And that's been a great thing for me to look to Christ and to bring him into my world more regularly than my world would normally allow. I've just carved out this time when I'm already doing something else that's kind of mindless, that this helps me to keep him in sight.
So those are some personal ways, and obviously they connect to this idea too of how the community can help if you're supporting other people going through grief and loss. So talking, not being afraid after Mass or as part of a group to say, how are you doing? The holidays are coming up, or this is your first or 30th holiday without them. Like, how do you remember and honor them? Really listening to people when they're sharing their stories. I think sometimes when there's any kind of suffering or pain, we want to fix it. And so much of what we're called to do is to listen empathetically and just to say, I'm so sorry that's hard for you. Can I pray for you? Or I'm here to listen, because a lot of times we can't fix it. Praying again in various ways, whatever is most comfortable for you. Or trying a new prayer. If there's something that was important to your person that they did, maybe that's something that you try in your own life. Checking in with people who are around you about what they're experiencing or what they might need. And then taking action on that. And I think something that Meg talks specifically about is this idea of extending mercy. Like, none of us choose what happens to us or how we go through life, but being able to help people bear the unbearable and to notice someone suffering. And instead of going to it with judgment, being able to say, I'm so sorry that you have to carry that and you don't need to carry it alone. And here are ways that I can show up for you or support you. And sometimes as humans, it is mainly through prayer. There's not a lot of tangible things that we can sometimes do that change the immediate reality. But I was going to ask both of you if you could share ways that the community, any faith community, has helped you during your time of pain and suffering.
Well, it's still going on, you know. I mean, I get so much amazing support from my friends and my family, and just encouraging and everything that you just said. So I really feel like this is a prayer that we're doing, you know, that sharing our story and making ourselves vulnerable and exposing all of this. Is in the spirit of sharing and bringing community.
She took my words. But I'm so thrilled, and as I know Meg is, to be here today and to be sharing our story with you. And it's not at all about selling books or any of that. It's really, both of us have gone through some really, really challenging times, and I think we've learned a lot from them. None of us is perfect and none of us has all the answers, but I think it has, as Meg alluded to earlier for herself, this has been like, I didn't expect this. I was just going to write this little book, and if anybody read it, great. And to be out here speaking to groups like you and to share my story is such an act of mercy that God is allowing me. I'm just really so delighted to be here with you.
And just a couple last tangible ways would be like cards, prayer shawl ministry, or collecting items for families in need. I know also like meal trains, food, just like the amazing food provided today is always helpful. Showing kindness in small ways, I think, really does make a difference, and also just shows how we can be like Christ to others. And another thing on mercy is not sharing gossip, or like if you don't know the story, instead of, sometimes people always want to know the why, like why did it happen or how did it happen? Sometimes in those moments, that doesn't change the outcome of what happened. So being able to really allow the family to protect their story, and if they care to share and when they care to share, they'll do that. But I think that's another tangible way of how we can support people in community, is not furthering people's pain by speculating or sharing information that could be untrue. So to wrap up, we are going to take a few minutes for questions, if anyone has one, and then we will close in prayer. So before we get to that, does anyone have a question in general or specific? Yep. So the question was in specific to post-traumatic growth because spirituality was at the top of it. Those were examples of ways, I would say, in my own personal experience, it has always been a connection that is closer to the top because I don't know how we can process pain without having some spiritual reference. Otherwise, it kind of is like, what's the point, in my opinion? But it doesn't have to be part of it. You can have post-traumatic growth even if the spiritual part isn't part of it. And I think a lot of times in grief and after loss, people either cling closer to it or away from it. But again, that can change over time. So right away, you might be like, screw you, God. I don't know why you would do this. I don't want anything to do with you. But over time, you can come closer or the opposite. What draws you back? I think it could be any of the self-care, any of those ideas or people, or just it kind of is individual to the person, but there's different ways of drawing back.
So, right after Danny died, I was just desperate for a community and a spiritual, like growing spiritually. I remember just going to Mass every chance I got, I just needed the sacraments. I needed the structure. That's not to say like you have to be Catholic or a practicing Catholic to exercise your grief and grow from it. But I will just tell you that to me, it was, no pun intended, a godsend.
Yeah, and I think it was just really coincidence that happened to be at the top of the list. I guess from both Meg and Maya and Kathleen's perspective, that is a pretty big one for all three of us. But I think it's a spirit in the sense even not necessarily of going to church or saying prayers while you exercise, or I think it's more finding your own connection with yourself and what you need to heal yourself and to move forward. And it may not be saying a prayer or saying the rosary or going to Mass or to a Sunday sermon, but I think just to allow yourself to look within and find things that do speak to you, that do help you to feel stronger. And maybe it's as simple as taking a walk every morning or whatever, but I think you have to find your own way, and I think it's very individual how you grow through grief.
Yep. The next question. He grew up in a family similar, and they all live in different areas. So what are practical ways to talk to siblings that live in different areas about some of the struggles they're facing?
So we have this goofy family text chain, and it's ridiculous, and it's R-rated sometimes, especially when the Bears play the Packers. But it helps us, we cover everything, including some pretty serious heartfelt stuff. And so that's just a silly way that we are united. But it is hard, you go your different ways and you get older, but that's just been, writing the book too, they were so gracious to help me do that, and we found that to be true. So yeah, I guess I would just say, start a family text chain.
My oldest sister, since both of my parents passed away, I don't know if she purposely did it, but kind of took on the maternal role. She was going to be the big sister and all of that to all of us. And so she's a regular walker, way too early in the morning. She's out there in all kinds of weather and at 6 in the morning. And she doesn't always call at that hour, but even as she's wrapping things up, it might be a little later. And she, on the regular, every week is calling every one of her siblings just to check in. And there might not be any real news to share necessarily, but every week she's getting a hold of each of us with absolute regularity. It's just uncanny how good she is at this. I've tried to emulate her a little bit, find time like when I'm in the car on a long drive, hands-free, that I will, I'll dial up a sister and see if I can reach one of them and just, what's going on, how are things, just those little somewhat regular episodes where you just try, and you never know what'll come out of it. It might be some junk about the Packers and the Bears, or it might be something much more I shouldn't say more heartfelt, sorry. I'm treading on dangerous ground here. But it might be something that is a more of a personal event for them, or something that they've encountered. And I think that's one way that it's like, just make that effort. I've got 5 siblings too, and I understand big families, it's easy to lose track of each other.
And cards, writing cards and ways always help. I see 2 questions. How do you deal with hate that develops in a family?
That's a hard one. Yeah, I was just going to say prayer. I mean, I think hate is usually grounded in fear, and so looking at the person with the lens of love, way easier said than done. Way easier said than done. But that person, I mean, if there's hate after a death, that suggests to me that person has something wrong. That is a person wounded. Hurt people. So pray for that person. I know that sounds like a total cop-out, but that's what I would do.
Yeah, I've experienced that. I don't know if it rises to the full level of hate, but there's a lot of animosity in one portion of my family. We won't get specific here, but it's one of those things that it's like, how can you have, because they've experienced tremendous loss also, not just of Steve, but of other siblings, and how can you experience that kind of loss and not stop the animosity and stop, but I don't preach at them. I try to accept them for what they are, and try to reach out and include them as best I can. If they're not willing to, then you have to, let it go and say prayers, because that's all that they're allowing you to do. But just to try to force open those paths just a little bit. I don't know if that helps or not.
I see a lot of the clients and people I work with, there's a lot around money and things, and they got this and she got this and that wasn't right. And while those are real human emotions and things that happen, ultimately none of that's coming with us. So finding ways to decide, like, is this really worth not having this relationship, this family, this holiday again? And sometimes, like, we can only control our actions in that, but it's also finding ways to make peace with that, and then just showing up to the best of your ability. I have a little sign before you leave my house. It says, kill them with kindness, which, again, a paradox, we don't want to kill, but I think it is that mindset of doing that and not engaging in some of the harder parts of conversation. So I think it's really important to make those connections between what is being said and then what's actually happening in our daily lived reality. So today, as a means of wrapping up our conversation, we're going to end with the prayer of St. Francis. Take a moment to ground yourself and think of the people who you miss. Think of the people who you love and that have helped guide you through your grief to this point. And we thank God for just this time together. And to close, we'll say, Lord, make me an instrument of your peace. Where there is hatred, let me sow love. Where there is injury, pardon. Where there is doubt, faith. Where there is despair, hope. Where there is darkness, light. And where there is sadness, joy. Grant that I may not so much seek to be consoled as to console, to be understood as to understand, to be loved as to love. For it is in giving that we receive, it is in pardoning that we are pardoned, and it is in dying that we are born to eternal life. Amen.